I'm the community development planner for the city of Fitchburg. Before I turn it over to Steve, he's with MSA, the consultant that we hired to do this plan, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and I'll have a couple housekeeping notes. There's a sign-in sheet, or there's a few sign-in sheets on the back counter there, so if anyone's willing to sign in and able to sign in back there sometime during the meeting, that would be appreciated. And again, thank you everyone for coming. This is the South Stoner Prairie Neighborhood Plan open house. This is the second open house that we've had for this plan. And we're going to start with a brief presentation. Steve's going to go through a brief presentation kind of highlighting the planning progress of this neighborhood so far. And then we'll have some activities and some time for questions and answers and discussion after that. So again, thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to Steve to kick it off with the presentation.
Thanks, Brad. Don't need it? Okay. Everyone can hear me? So we'll go over updating the process, plan area overview, which are some of the maps that you see here behind me. We'll talk about the future land use categories that are up on the 3 boards, and also about the land use diagrams. And as noted, we'll have a little time that we can have some questions as a group, but then you can also ask additional questions when we're individually during the activities. So we've had 2 steering committee meetings. That includes property owners, local residents, and other key stakeholders as part of that steering committee. We had in November as our first meeting, another one in January. We're actually going to have another one tomorrow. So some of the feedback you even give tonight is going to be presented there tomorrow. Had a first open house back in December. We've had key stakeholder interviews, meaning property owners, the school district. We've had conversations even with WSDOT, and we're still trying to lock in a couple more conversations that we're going to have to kind of build this process. If you don't know, there's an online survey that is available right now, and it is about the concepts that are actually presented tonight. We're going to close that by noon tomorrow so that we can have all the feedback for a discussion with the steering committee. And I'll show where that is located if you haven't been able to do that yet. And then today is the open house 2. Coming up, steering committee meeting, development focus group is scheduled for April 2nd. So we have realtors, other development specialists, people have done development in housing and other uses, industrial, so that we can get some feedback about the market of what we're presenting in these concepts. So that's going to be happening on April 2nd. And then after that, we'll have another steering committee meeting. So if you haven't looked at the map now, there's roughly only 5 owners within this study area. You can see the different colors of them. Most of them on the northern half are quarries or in the process of being quarried, while the southern half has been left more open, natural, and agricultural. Roadways, you see that the nexus to the 18 to the west, you have more adjacent, you have the Lacey Road to the north, you have Vitrono to the west. It doesn't reach all the way, about halfway down to where you get to Wayland, and not all the way east to Seminole Highway. So as mentioned, some of this is quarried, so when you look at natural resources, while we're not seeing a lot of wetlands here, you see some woodlands that are showing up. There is a path of stormwater that you see in the blue line that heads to the west, and I'll show another map about that. But you see a lot of steep slopes, which is that pink color, because those areas are being quarried, and you're going to see more of that greater leaf. They're going to ultimately be down 30, 40 feet from current grade, and that's a major impact of what we talk about for land use here. It's also noted about stormwater. So there was a plan that was done in 2020 related to some issues around Goose Lake, and you can see those, if you follow the blue lines back to this neighborhood, portions of this neighborhood would impact that downstream. So we have to consider that as part of our development process to manage the water prior to it exiting the study area and the individual developments. So initial public input so far, we had an open house I mentioned in December. While that was a combined one with the Greenfield neighborhood that we're also working on at the same time. So there was approximately 80 people here during the presentation, but then we split off for this specific neighborhood a few doors down, and roughly about 18 participants joined into that one. What were the comments? Newer residents wanted to preserve connection to nature with interspersed mixed-use trails and paths, need to incorporate opportunities for mass transit. What I equate this to mean, and other plans we've done that doesn't have mass transit yet, is the consideration of usership. So greater densities along major arterials or major roads that route may go will help fund the likelihood of actually having busing there. You have to have enough people that would use it to make it worthwhile. Maintain and expand diversity of housing types to accommodate younger families, professionals, and seniors. Consider traffic concerns increased along Lacey Road. So we did take some traffic counts a few weeks after it reopened, and we're going to do some modeling as part of this process of how this land use impacts future use of those roads. Need local shopping for residents southeast of Highway 18, and how will the vision of the quarry lands be altered for residents? So I mentioned the property owners that are doing the quarrying are part of this steering committee. They also were part of the key stakeholder interviews because they own a good portion of the land that's being altered. The intent is to see how it could be developed once they're done quarrying the land. So they're key stakeholders because what ended up happening there is based in their hands at this current state, based on the ownership. There was also a city put out a online mapping input tool back in November and ran all the way through January, 50 responses. You can see the smattering of dots that were certain topics. Could have been about stormwater, could have been about pedestrian bike opportunities, traffic concerns, something to preserve, and other comments. From the landowner interviews, interested in the highest and best use primarily is what their request was, not specific to a type, but what is the best use of the land working with the city. Extraction will continue over the next 5-10 years plus, but that transition to development. So typically you would put it back into the state of agriculture or open space, but since this is, there's development pressure in the area, and this is part of the city growth area, going right to the idea of what that development can be is a good win for the city of thinking about how we can provide housing that's needed, maybe jobs, and that's part of this process. Like I mentioned, most of the land's going to be 40 to 60 feet below. I will note in conversations to the land that's in the orange specifically, there isn't interest in excavating any material there, so that land will be 40, 50 feet above the rest of it unless you fill it in a little bit. Similarly to the west of that orange property, the material does, after you get the green, I guess I would say, in the southwest corner, also doesn't have that material. So that land might be a little bit higher, more to current state. School district, mentioned we talked to them. In their projections, it shows that Stoner Prairie Elementary could see capacity issues, but there are strategies in place to allow for the student population to grow. Land is being considered east of this neighborhood for additional schools. There's also an opportunity to consider in this neighborhood an elementary or middle school. And so you see in one of the concepts we did show land that could be a school property. So to set the stage of what the land use bubbles are talking about, what those initials mean, we want to talk a little bit about what does that equate to density for residential and what does that mean for, what do I say, neighborhood mixed use. So low density residential, we're talking 2 to 4 units per acre. If you're talking about single family, just think about that as half-acre lots to quarter-acre lots. But we're not dictating specifically that it could not be larger lots. It's just an average of total for the density of that area. Medium density, we're talking 5 to 9 units per acre. So that could be generally smaller than a quarter-acre lots for single family. But you can see that you go from low density, whether it's single unit, duplex, triplex, fourplex, meaning 3 unit, 4 unit, to medium density where you do bring in that extra townhomes. Generally it's between 3 and 6 units that would be attached. And then small unit buildings, meaning typically 8 or 12 is the max typically in that size frame of units. High density per the comp plan says over 9, so we're saying over 10 and over density here. And again, when we say high density, while there is a lot of multifamily apartments being built, it's not a policy to say high density residential means apartments, large apartments. It means it could be single units that have an 8th or 12-acre lots that are on alleys. You get that same amount of density that we're talking about here, 10 or over. It could be duplex, triplex, townhomes. It could be a blend of those. There likely would be some apartment buildings, but we could talk about what kind of policies might be necessary if there's concerns about other areas in the city and want to see this different, or is it open to that? That's part of why we're having this conversation today, and we will have further conversations because there will be another open house and ultimately a public hearing at the end. When we say neighborhood mixed use, it doesn't mean that every building is what you typically think of, which is retail on the first floor, residential above. What it means is it could be standalone, high-density residential. It could be commercial properties. We're suggesting maybe with neighborhood tag to it that it wouldn't be anything over 25,000 square feet. That number can change, but just saying it's smaller than what you're seeing in other locations. Or it could be within that same building. So we call it horizontal mixed use, where it's a single property that has maybe a standalone commercial building and then a standalone residential building. That is horizontal mixed use. Vertical is where you see that uses vertically. Commercial, which actually currently isn't really on the land use maps, and we can talk about that. We kind of allowed that neighborhood mixed use category cover what minimal commercial that may be plausible here. And we do want some commercial use generally for a healthy neighborhood. You want walkable commercial at a smaller scale. And so we are promoting the neighborhood mixed use versus general commercial. But it is another category we could talk about. And then business park, you'll see one of them geared to business park, where there's office building, showrooms, warehouses, light industrial. Sometimes it could even be retail that's kind of in support of job and lunch breaks and such like that. So it doesn't limit it just to office. Then the other one's institutional utilities. That's where you get your school, or you have solar farm that's to the east of this property, of the study area. Park and recreation, which could have trails in that. It could have stormwater management. And then there's dedicated spaces that would just be about stormwater and conservancy that also typically can have trails as well. And so when you look at these are very higher level right now, so we're not showing every little park. So like if you were to develop a property, there's a certain requirement within each development to have a certain amount of park space, or it's fee in lieu of. So there would be other parks in these bigger bubbles, but we are noting a specific area in both where it makes sense because if there's already stormwater, it has to be managed there, or it's a good connection or a buffer zone, we call it, between more intensive uses and the lower intensity uses. Let that all sit for a second. You had a preview of a couple of the concepts, but I'll just go through some of the thoughts behind it. And the intent is not to say it's option A or option B in this conversation. It could be, I like this part of option A, I like this part of option B, or something else. So these are just trying to give you some variability of options, but thinking about how land uses are connected to each other. Someone did ask, seeing that we do show uses in the northwest portion of this, that is actually outside the study area, but it hasn't been approved of the plat, and it has some major bearings to what you do for the other land uses. So we are currently showing what could be there in both concepts. Some are quite different than what is planned for that area, and that's for further conversation. But this one is actually more in line with what that original plan for that area. So you see the medium density residential in portions that actually aren't part of that plat. There are individual lot owners in that quadrant. But then seeing that lower density residential south of that. So if you're not following what I'm stating yet, we can see the pointer. So this area right in here is actually already in the urban service area. So if you didn't know the background of this project, it's in the comp plan to say this is a growth area. And part of getting utilities through this area, specific sanitary, you have to amend the map to allow this area to be served. And so that's the main impetus to doing part of this process, as well as land use conflict and decision making. And so that quadrant actually is already in the urban service area. But again, wanting to show something that's generally shown in that concept that they've already moved forward with in the urban service area amendment, but also looking at other options. So then if you follow it to the east, there's actually where the scale and other stuff for the extraction, and in discussing with that property owner, they don't currently intend to remove that in the short term or midterm. So we're looking at that property as a long-term changeover, and we're showing neighborhood mixed use in that location. To the east of that, coming off Commerce Drive, you see in this concept of high-density residential, a large pocket of this. And remember, while you're going to be connected at the road at Lacey, it's going to drop that 30, 40, 50 feet. So any intensity you see there is actually going to be reduced from the surrounding neighborhoods. But we do show open space on the far east portion of that as a buffer, but also for stormwater related. And then you see major focus as this north-south road from Fitchburg that curls around that park space. You see those kind of green dash lines? That shows where there's a severe grade change. So I mentioned before that that property owner to the south does not intend to extract material, so they're going to be much higher. So you got to actually work around that portion that's going to see that grade change. So that's why we showed this park. This could be a unique park where it could actually be a sledding hill and other features that are using that grade change as part of that park. But then you see the road that wraps around that to the east and can continue all the way down to Grandview. Then there's a second east-west street to the south there where you're seeing that low-density residential east, and then you work up to medium residential as you go to Fitch-Rona to the west. And so that's kind of that gradation of intensity from the north end of this neighborhood down to where right now it's rural. The reality is likely development may continue all the way down to Grandview at some point, but that's not part of this process. This one does have the school, the blue in the middle, so you can kind of see that is kind of a nexus between some of the residential areas with some neighborhood mixed use to the west of that school. Again, having walkable, commercial, retail, jobs even, is a good, healthy way to build neighborhoods. So that's that concept. Option B is the one that actually focuses more, a good portion on the business park, coming off Commerce Park. So that's kind of an extension, what you see north of there as you go north, kind of extending that further south into this development. You still have that open space that's going to be in the middle that's dealing with that grade change and stormwater management. You see a lot more low-density residential on the southern half, with then the pockets in the northwest corner where you see that medium high density and even a little section of neighborhood mixed use at the intersection of Lacey and Fitch-Rona. So that was a brief overview because I wanted time to be able to look at the maps a little bit more, have conversations with MSA as well as staff. There's also going to be comment forums. We're going to have the two options up on these tables where you can provide comments on the worksheets or be able to talk to us about it. And again, those comments we're going to turn around right around tomorrow for a conversation with the steering committee. So if you're able to, at least fill them out today or tomorrow morning and get it to staff, that would be the ideal scenario to provide your feedback, because we are looking to maybe move towards a preferred concept that would be designed to the level of showing all the streets. Again, these are more of just the collector streets that are through here, but there will be additional streets shown in more of the detailed concept, which is the next step. There's also a board over here, a whiteboard, where you could put a word or a phrase that you would want someone to state about this neighborhood when developed 20 years from now. What would you want it to be stated? You know, do you want something preserved? Do you want more open space, trails? I'm not trying to give you answers, but just put a few words down there if you're able to. And then again, we're here to answer questions. I appreciate you guys all coming out. And there's more to this process. This is going to run all the way to the end of the year. So assume by fall we would actually have a full draft plan. But we're still kind of working through the land use section. Once we get down through land use, then we say, all right, this land use is going to impact the utilities, transportation. That's where we're going to start looking, analyzing those other infrastructure needs to kind of serve the idea of this design that we're coming towards. So these are two concepts that are going to be going down to one, and then we're going to do analysis to kind of say, how can utilities serve that land, and what does it do for traffic around it? Mentioned the survey at the bottom here that it's open till noon tomorrow. I think we actually already have, I want to say it was 180 or so responses. And for an area that currently doesn't have a lot of residents, it's actually, I'm happy about that. But please, if you have not done it yet, noon until tomorrow, there's a QR code there. Otherwise, it's on the city website showing there for neighborhood plans 23 to 24, and go to the Stoner Prairie location for that. So we'll take a few minutes if anyone wants to come up to the mic to ask questions as a group, but then we can also have questions just individually. Does anyone want to have a statement or question?
I live in the 4th district. Oh, I'm Paul Suffin, you guys saw. You know where to hunt me at. I live in the 4th district. The O'Brien farm and the area there, I used to hunt. So, and I'm wondering if any of these other people are, where is the water going? I've seen subdivision go up like, Mushroomville. Whoops, where's the water? So has this water been looked at all, when it rains and stuff?
Stormwater? Yep. I mean,
There's stormwater, but where's the stormwater going? Because if you go towards Seminole Highway, that pond right there fills up pretty fast. That's over off of PD in Seminole. But it was never meant to have more subdivisions out to the south. So, and when things back up, water finds the cheapest way up. So the more I look at it, it doesn't look like you show any way of water flow. And the other thing in this subdivision, I drove trucks, so here's my problem. How many cul-de-sacs or dead ends are there in there?
in the concepts,
Yeah,
I did not show any.
you didn't show any because,
And that's collector roads that we haven't really designed, but I prefer connected streets as well.
Okay, because dead ends are a dead end. Thoroughfare street makes the traffic go in all directions. If you put cul-de-sacs, I live in the 4th district, you put cul-de-sacs, everybody's going to go one street. So I'm just two of them that I think of right now, so
Sure.
I'll be back.
Appreciate the comments, and I put on the screen, I don't know if it's up, but of where the areas do funnel to the west. As part of any development, you have to meet pre-development conditions. So water will be managed on site, and that would come at the next stage. There are generally some places that we're showing open space, which would have some of that stormwater, as well as the park space. But that's not at the level of scale we're looking at right now. But it would be a requirement not only of local ordinance, but also by the state to manage that. And I've learned you can't fight water. It's definitely a major key to how you develop. And maybe it's confusing just on the other point, though, of cul-de-sacs. There are circles on here, but that is related to suggestion of potentially could be roundabouts, traffic circles.
I forgot one thing. Is there going to be water ponds that restrict some of the water leaving the area?
Typically, it's designed to, there's dry ponds, and then there's wet ponds, and you generally need both. One's for the sediment, which is the wet, and then you have infiltration, which allows it to seep into the ground, so reduces the rate leaving the site.
Is that planned in it already?
It's not currently designed in. There's generally ideas of where some open space major areas are in the open space area in the park, but in this next level design, it would show how generally water should be treated in a regional form. Individual sites may have to have additional management as well. Anyone else have a question or a comment?
Hi, Patrick Cheney. I'm more watching the Greenfield neighborhood on the east side that you're also doing. I'm just wondering, between the two neighborhoods, and as you said, you, MSA, are doing both of these plans in parallel at the same time. I'm wondering, from your perspective, are you seeing any difference in the various zoning districts between one plan and the other Or are you trying to kind of make them equal between the two different plans, east side and west side of the city? Kind of like, is there, let's say, a particular zoning district that might be more favorable, well, let's say less favorable in one that maybe gets pushed to the other side of town?
Sure. I didn't want to cut you off. So, one, we won't be showing zoning. We'll be showing more generally land use that can allow for multiple zoning districts, depending on what the city policy is on. But it's just like the comp plan. This is going to be an amendment to the comp plan. So it's going to have a general land use, and then it says allowable zoning districts typically, what could be there. But to more of what you're asking between the two, I would say, based on comments so far, as you know, in the Greenfield, has been slightly different than what we're hearing in this neighborhood so far. And so there's definitely more lower density in that neighborhood. And even the new concept of agri-hoods that we've talked about. I don't know if you attended that meeting or not, but the idea that you conserve land like a conservation easement neighborhood, but you cluster residential within farming areas. That's not shown in this concept. It could be brought into this one, but we felt that the nexus to the development, to the business park, I am showing a little more higher density. And again, the grade change that we're going to have, and when this is all completed, being quarried, has some potential reduction in its impact to the neighboring properties. Yes, there's still impact. But so this one is probably showing some greater densities overall. Now, I think the Greenfield is a larger neighborhood, so the numbers might not suggest it's a big variability, but if you look at the percentages within each neighborhood, I would say the density is probably a little bit higher on these concepts than they are to Greenfield.
In these various low density, medium density, high density, just in general, is there a level of density, units per acre, that starts to require that it goes to multiple floors, like at medium density or at high density, just dictates that it has to be multiple floors?
I want to clarify is, a lot of single-family homes, duplexes are 2 stories. Are you talking about beyond 2?
One housing unit on top of another housing unit,
Okay,
not just a
stacked
2-story home.
units. Okay.
Yeah.
Typically, only multi-unit structures that are the small that we're talking about could be 8, 12 units. That's typically a 2-story where they have stacked units. But townhouses are generally usually individual owners that could be on the 2nd story, but they don't stack on top of each other. So anything below that would not. So low density residential would not incorporate any that are stacked units. But medium density can allow for that. Potentially, we haven't finalized it, but we're talking could be 8, maybe 12 unit buildings. Could be a little bit larger depending on our conversation. And those would have the stacked in some cases. So in medium density residential, apartment buildings or condos can be stacked units.
Which density level?
Medium is the...
Which what I'm getting at is what density level just seems to just require that it goes to stacked housing units on top of each other.
Sure, I think...
is it high density or...
Not even high density, because I mentioned that it could have single family and duplex. It's all about the lot size. The neighborhood mixed use is probably the only one that would typically say it is that multi-stacked units. So neighborhood mixed use, so the red here would be ones that are almost saying that's the lowest of the development type generally, is the stacked units.
The neighborhood mixed use?
NMU, yes.
What density level is that? That's the high one.
Yeah, I mean, there's high density, both high density and neighborhood mixed use, as we're suggesting now, is the 10 units or more per acre.
Okay. And that just by the density level that it's trying to shoot for means it has to go multiple floors.
Typically, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Did you want to add anything to that, Brad?
I was just going to clarify too that not all of the land uses depicted in the high density are stacked units, because we have, examples of 10th acre or 12th acre single family homes. So the density that necessitates that stacked unit would be somewhere above that 12 units an acre.
I'm just curious about your thinking about a restoration of the quarry area or use of it. I suppose an option would be to have a large pond, a large retention, maybe a recreational pond there. Or do these envision filling that in? And it's not clear to me what you're thinking here for what will be done to that quarry land.
So the quarry that's happening currently is Fitchburg Minerals in the center of the site that goes from Lacey all the way down halfway through the neighborhood. Areas to the east of that will also be quarried over the next 5+ years. Potentially also the red area that's to the south. All those areas are, there may be discussions about how we could raise portions of it, but generally speaking, we're talking about development. Now, I did mention the one key thought on where that grade change is going to happen before that orange property, where it's not going to be excavated. There is going to be a huge grade change there. So you have to decide on uses that are adjacent to that. The one concept shows, this concept shows it being part of a larger park. Or again, you can use that hill for sledding and other things that are not in your typical park within the city. But otherwise, all the uses you're seeing here are suggesting there is going to be development throughout where lands are quarried. There will be ponds and stormwater related to it, but it's not saying the entire core area will be recreational. It's suggesting development with the necessary open space to make it attractive and connect to other neighborhoods. Could make you get a workout for your questions. It's all right. We do have to put it on the mic, though.
This right here is Fitchburg's dream of people wanting to move out in the rural area. This right here. The top picture is the houses in Area 4, lakes. Now this right here, and like this, is more like over here. Because the first plan has already been done. So over at Stone Prairie, you're not ever going to build that because that'll stick out like a sore thumb and the developer will go broke. This right here, since it's already been started, it's not like you're opening a brand new piece of property. You're hooking up to adjacent, and you don't want it to go, them people, us people. You want all of them to be more or less looking the same. And I drove truck, and I've seen a lot of different people doing different stuff, where they do put this in a brand new subdivision. They put this, and they put next to it. You're done. Because these people, in order to have that, you got to have acreage, at least a half acre. This right here is less than a quarter. And I'm just, I'm here just to watch, to see, because Greenfield is that. We're old. These two will never hardly ever get along with that. But since you have this, you guys can plan and make it adhere to each other instead of, but thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Carol Poole. I have a question about The major difference that I see between the two plans is that the second plan has no business park, or the first plan has no business park. And I'm assuming that the location of it on that particular map is due to the fact that that's the flattest area, most level, and probably more conducive to large sites. Is there any opportunity to find a business site in option A to open up some opportunities? Because option A, while it does serve finding housing options, doesn't really serve finding occupational options for this neighborhood. And I would like to see maybe some sort of, other than a couple of mixed-use areas, an employment area included in that plan, in both plans, because I think that's an important thing to have in Fitchburg, too.
Thank you. And I know it's recording. I hope to get that in document form if you're able to. Brad is over there diligently writing down stuff, but adding that comment and then we have it in the group, that'd be great. Was there someone else that? No. Okay. But again, the idea with these two are to see the variability between them to get these comments, because again, the assumption is not that we're picking A or B. It's a blending, and we'll work out how the land uses work within that new option that will be presented later in this process. Well, again, I appreciate everyone's coming out here. We do have the option to look at these a little closer, provide comments on these worksheets where you can we numbered out a grid on the side panel here to be able to give you more direction, give us more direction what you're commenting on. And so there's two sides. There's general comments at the end. That survey is available, again, on the city's website. And then, again, if you have any vision images or statements. So appreciate your time. We're here till 7. And otherwise, have a good evening.